The Palestinian boycott movement is a response. That's the key thing. It's a counter boycott. It's a response to the fact that they are already being boycotted to all intents and purposes. If boycotting someone is cutting off ties with them, then that's exactly what the Israelis have done to Palestinians. It's most clear in the case of Gaza, which has just been under siege, cut off from the world, its inhabitants deprived of the most basic requirements of a decent kind of life for an unimaginably long time. And so that is really a boycott in all but name. And the tactics that Palestinians have developed to resist that should be seen as a counter boycott. Palestinians are just responding to the deprivation and the dispossession and the violence that Israel inflicts on them. The important thing about a boycott is that it needs to be part of a campaign. It's not enough to just stop doing something because that something is related to Israel. The boycott needs to be part of an explicit, publicized campaign which everyone knows about and understands the reasons for. And for that reason, the Palestinian Boycott National Committee, which is the organization that is in charge of Palestinians' own boycott tactics, they have identified particular companies that they think should be boycotted as a priority. So companies like HP, the IT manufacturer, or companies like Puma, the sportswear manufacturer, these companies are both subject to boycott campaigns which are coordinated by the Boycott National Committee in Palestine. It's much less effective to boycott something if no one knows why you're doing so and no one understands why the company involved has responsibility for the oppression of Palestinians. It needs to be a targeted boycott, and it needs to be directed against the particular boycott targets that the Palestinians themselves are coordinating. As institutions, Israeli universities are deeply responsible for the kinds of violence that the Israeli state inflicts on Palestinians. So Israeli universities are deeply involved in, for example, research into weapons, which then goes to bolster the Israeli Defense Forces arsenals. Weapons for the Israeli Defense Forces are developed in Israeli universities. Israeli universities are involved in the training of officers in the Israeli military. So Palestine in many ways, or the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, function as laboratories for the testing of Israeli weapons. The weapons that are developed by Israeli arms manufacturers in conjunction with Israeli universities are battle tested on Palestinians, and it's because they're effective on Palestinians that they can be sold elsewhere in the world with the guarantee that they really do blow people up and destroy them and blow them to smithereens. Students who study at Israeli universities can get course credit for engaging in essentially propaganda online to support Israel. So there are all of these ways in which institutionally Israeli universities are directly responsible for the oppression of Palestinians. The Israeli government has set up a task force in order to coordinate these efforts, and that does things like encourage Zionist donors to withdraw funding from American universities which are not seen as sufficiently pro-Israel. So the campaign against Liz Magel, the campaign against Claudine Gay at Harvard, are both orchestrated attempts by Israel lobby organizations to target figures in the university world who it sees as insufficiently friendly. And that's just one small component of a much wider campaign which targets universities specifically, because universities are seen, rightly so, I think, as particularly important sites for Palestinian activism. We know that young people generally are more likely to be pro-Palestinian than older people, and that's something that often starts at university. And there are many ways in which Israel's efforts to silence pro-Palestinian speech at universities unfold, and one of them that's particularly important, I think, is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. So this is a particular definition of anti-Semitism which Israel lobby organizations have been trying to impose on universities and other cultural institutions throughout the West. And the effect of this definition is essentially to make it anti-Semitic, to criticize the current policies of the Israeli government towards Palestinians. To tell the truth about what's happening in Gaza is considered as anti-Semitic by Israel. So this idea that the situation that we see before our eyes and which is unambiguous is actually much more complicated and much more favourable to Israel than it seems is a standard claim that Zionists use to just avoid the most basic facts, which are of course in favour of Palestinians. Zionists smartwash Israeli atrocities just like they try to pinkwash it or greenwash it. Smartwashing is just this term that I use in my book to describe the way that Zionists and other conservatives or other reactionaries often claim that the facts are more complicated than they seem. So, for instance, they say to Palestinian solidarity activists like me, they say, look, you're not being nuanced enough. You're not being subtle enough. You don't really understand. What's happening isn't really a genocide. That's a misuse of the term genocide. If you look at the term genocide, it's actually much more complicated than that, and you're missing all of that complexity. Similarly with the claim that Israel is an apartheid state. Zionists tell us that's far too simple. It's just not, it's much more complicated than that. As though they're the cleverest people in the room, and as though they're able to understand things which we, Palestine solidarity activists, just can't understand, and they never explain why we can't understand it. So pinkwashing is the claim that Israel is friendly to gay people, and greenwashing is the claim that Israel is environmentally friendly. And in both cases, these are ways of trying to paint Israel as superior or as desirable in a way that's meant to discredit the Palestine solidarity movement. I mean, the most important thing about the boycott of Israel is that Palestinians themselves have asked for it. So in 2004 or 2005, there were about 170 or over 173 Palestinian organizations, things like unions, charities, cultural organizations, and many others who came together and called for a boycott of Israel until justice was achieved for Palestinians. So until Palestinians, that's why we should do it. Because if we didn't do it, that would be a very serious failure of solidarity to Palestinians. Apart from the fact that Palestinians have asked for it, the boycott is a important and effective tool for many reasons. One is that it relies on ordinary people's power. It completely bypasses, governments and states who have shown themselves to be completely ineffective in achieving justice for Palestine.